Let's go ahead and continue on.
Mr. Ribble,
Yeah.
the Patriot Act. One you just mentioned the Patriot Act which was passed by Congress.
Yeah, and I'll come back and talk about the Patriot Act at the end of this, okay? So, if we rolled back Bush tax cuts for all Americans, we could balance the budget. That's true statement or false statement? Did you hear about the 2001, 2003 tax rates all the time? If we rolled it back and just went back to the rates that were in place under President Clinton, would we balance the budget? That's true or false statement? No? Let's go ahead to the next slide. And it's not true. We could roll them all back and we still couldn't balance the budget. It would help. Well, sure. It would help to the tune of about 800. Right. It would help to the tune of about 800 billion. Right. Yeah. Let's go ahead to the next question. The top 1% of all wage earners in this country pay about what percent of all personal income taxes collected by the federal government? So the top 1% of all the income tax, personal income tax that the government receives, what percent of all those income taxes come from the top 1%? 18, 28, 38, 48, or 58?
48.
Can I put it down? Let's go ahead to the next slide. It's 38%. The top 1% are paying 38% of all personal income tax revenue to the country. Let's go to the next question. So what happens if we look at the top 10%? The top 10% of all wage earners in America pay about what percent of all personal income taxes collected by the federal government? 50%? 60%? 70? 80? Or 90%? Kind of make your best guess. All right, let's go to the next slide. I can hear some of you talking. 70%. So the top 10% wage earners are paying 70% of all the income taxes. Let's go to the next question.
How doesn't matter?
What percentage of Americans, what percentage of Americans currently pay no personal income tax? 7%? 17%? 27%? 37%? Or 47%? Pay no personal income tax. Go ahead and mark it down on your paper, and we'll go to the next slide. 47%. So, now that doesn't mean they don't pay other taxes. No, they pay payroll tax, they pay sales tax, they pay property tax, they pay these other taxes. But so does the top 53% pay all those things as well. So we've got a system that's out of balance. And here's why. Most Americans have never seen this. I'm going to show it to you. So I got to get a good grip on it. It's heavy. This is the Internal Revenue Code. This is it. This is what it looks like. It's about 10,400 pages long. Okay, and it's relatively fine print. Kind of, for those of you who can see it, relatively fine print, relatively thin paper, and very, very difficult reading. I've tried to read parts of it. Very difficult reading. And there are volumes and volumes of books this size that explain what's in this book. And is it any wonder that, and I don't say this tongue in cheek, I don't really believe that anybody really knows everything that's there. I really don't believe it. And over the course of time, whether it's been major corporations that have been able to build in set-asides, whether it's the federal government wanting to manipulate behavior, whatever the reason, whether it's government trying to simplify something. Be careful when politicians say, I want to simplify the code. That's code for adding another 1,000 pages. I often hear that we need to raise tax rates. I want you to know the problem's not tax rates. It's not the rate that we assign. We make the top rate 70%. You make whatever you want. Because it's not the rate that matters. It's not that we tax rich people too little on the rate. It's that we subsidize them too much. And until we really understand that paradigm, we can never really fix the problem. And so playing around with the rate isn't going to solve the problem. We have to begin to eliminate the pages. You should be able to write tax law in about 25 or 30 pages. And every single American ought to be able to understand it. In 2009, the IRS told me that they received a little more than 160 million phone calls asking them questions about the code that businesses and individuals and tax preparers called. 160 million. They were only able to answer 53% of them. So you're dealing with more than 50 million questions that the IRS couldn't even answer. I personally think it's time to throw this one out and start over. And let's fix it once and for all. Let's stop nibbling around the edges and actually begin to fix things. Let's go to the next slide. In 1965, when Medicare was created, which of the following was the average life expectancy for an American, according to the U.S. Center for Disease Control? What was the average life expectancy in 1965? 60, 63, 65, 70, 75, or 79? I hear all kinds of numbers. Here's the number, 70. In 1965, the average life expectancy was 70. Now, all right, and now today, in 2011, what is the average life expectancy for an American according to the U.S. Census Bureau? Here we are just about 45 years later, 50 years later. Medicine's improved things. We're living longer. So now is it 70, 75, 79, 82? Do we go backwards? Let's go ahead to the next slide. It's 79. 79. And so if we built a system assuming that the average American is going to pass away at age 70, but they're now living to age 79, roughly, what is that, 11% longer, it's natural that we'd have a shortfall, isn't it? And as medicine continues to advance, it's roughly advancing, by the way, extending life expectancy by about 2 years per decade. That's how fast medicine is advancing, and we're living longer, and we're living more healthy into those years. All right, next question. According to the AMA, what % of primary care physicians already limit the Medicare patients in their practice? This is according to the American Medical Association. Doctors limit how many Medicare patients they'll accept. What percentage of doctors actually limit their practice? Is it 5%, 10%, 20, 25, or 31%? Go ahead and show the next slide. So a full third of primary care physicians are limiting how many patients they'll accept in Medicare. And this gets exacerbated by the fact that fewer and fewer students are choosing primary care as their specialty, if they're going to be a doctor, they want to be a surgeon, or they want to go into one of the specialties. And primary care pays less than almost all the other specialties. Typical primary care doctors are earning about $150,000 a year. Some surgeons are earning $600,000 or $700,000 a year. So there's a big disparity in specialty. And so we kind of, our economy actually punishes prevention and rewards cutting. Follow what I'm saying? We kind of reward those physicians who do and have gained the skills to do actual surgery as opposed to those physicians that help us avoid surgery. Let's go on. In 1940, there were 159 workers for each Social Security beneficiary. As of 2009, there are how many workers for every Social Security beneficiary? As of 2009. In 1940, there were 159. So for every person moving into the retirement years, 159 workers were underneath them. Because remember, it's today's current workers paying for today's retirees. Let's go ahead and pick the number. It's 3. Now, how many of you had grandchildren? How many of you had grandchildren? Okay, look at this. Almost everybody's got grandchildren. Me too. My oldest grandson is 8. Anybody have any 8-year-old grandchildren or great-grandchildren? There we go. Got some. I want you to know when your 8-year-old grandson or granddaughter reaches age 65, 47% of the U.S. population will be 65 or older. We're facing a demographics change in this country that can take us to a crisis point when it comes to our social safety nets for seniors. So by the time your grandson or grandchild whose age is 65, there plain and simply will not be enough workers to support these programs. So the programs have to be reformed somehow, and we haven't quite come to what that reform should look like. But we know that 3 workers, very difficult to sustain it with 3 workers. When we go down to 1-to-1, it's a real problem. I mean, we've got issues, and our birth rates are relatively low from a historical standpoint. Right now, we're at replacement level. So every woman's replacing the husband and wife, replacing the spouse. So we have 2 children per family. So we're not growing at all. But we're getting older. So let's go on. True or false? President Obama's budget, by the White House's own projection, would accumulate more debt by 2020 than every president in American history, from President Washington to President Bush, this is W. Bush, combined. Is that a true or false statement? Now this is not, and I want you to know, this is not necessarily for me a statement about President Obama. President Obama is facing the same struggles that we in the Congress are facing. He's facing the same demographics changes that we're facing. 10,000 seniors retiring a day. It's going to go on for the entire baby boom generation, which will last for 19 years. I mean, huge stresses put on our economy. Go ahead to the next slide. And that's true. That's the last one. Okay. And so there it is. I hope that has given you some insight into some of the complexity of what it is we're up against here. When you look at demographics changes, you look at an aging society, when you look at the fact that we're not replacing or adding physicians rapidly enough. When the lady back over here that asked earlier about doctors scamming the system, why is it that when you go in on Medicare that for, I think you worded an ankle problem, that they do 24, 30 other tests on you? Well, the current Medicare system is a fee-for-service system. So that means doctors get paid if they do services. And everyone needs to understand that. I was with a gentleman down in the valley just a few weeks ago who was sharing that his mother, who recently passed away, was taken in for a CAT scan literally hours before she passed away. Hours before she passed away. And so a fee-for-service system can actually increase the amount of fraud because we have incentivized for them to get fees. We've incentivized the medical community to do more services, right? And you hope that the doctors that you deal with and you work with, and they understand your lifestyle, that you want just the services that are necessary to treat the condition that you're currently facing. Yes, sir. Right, and what he just said is if they overlook something, then they get sued, which is also true for sometimes. You know, not everybody's sued, but sometimes they get sued. And doing just simple tort reform, if we change the legal system so that doctors wouldn't be sued, if we don't change the behavior of the doctors, we haven't really accomplished anything, have we? We've taken one right away, but we've not really fixed the problem. And so whatever we do in legal reform has to be done in such a way that it changes physician behavior as it relates to the amount of tests that they do. And we may not fix it if in fact they get incented to do more tests. And so,
close some of the law schools.
Yeah, well sure.